Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to our channel. Today we'll be talking about Rodney James Alcala. You may recognize his name. Rodney James Alcala was an American serial killer and convicted sex offender who was sentenced to death in California for 7 murders committed between 1977 and 1979. He also pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 25 years to life for 2 further murders committed in New York. He was also indicted for a murder in Wyoming, although the charges filed there were dropped. While Alcala has been conclusively linked to 8 murders, the true number of victims remains unknown and could be as high as 130 people that this scumbag killed. Alcala compiled a collection of more than 1,000 photographs of women, teenage girls, and boys, many in sexually explicit poses. In 2016, he was charged with the 1977 murder of a woman identified in one of his photos. Alcala is known to have assaulted one other photo subject, and police have speculated that others could be rape or murder victims as well. Prosecutors have said that Alcala toyed with his victims, strangling them until they lost consciousness, then waiting until they revived, sometimes repeating this process several times before finally killing them. One police detective described Alcala as a killing machine, and others have compared him to Ted Bundy. Alcala is often referred to as the dating game killer, as he appeared on the television show The Dating Game in 1978 during the midst of his murder spree. Rodney Alcala was born in San Antonio, Texas, the third of 4 children born to a Mexican-American couple, Raul Alcala Bucor and Ana Maria Gutierrez. In 1951, Alcala's father moved the family to Mexico, then abandoned them 3 years later. In 1954, when Alcala was aged 11, his mother moved him and his 2 sisters to suburban Los Angeles. Alcala was an academically gifted student who was reasonably popular among his peers and was supported by his family. He attended various private schools during his youth before graduating from Cantwell Sacred Heart of Mary High School. He was on the yearbook planning committee and on the track and cross-country teams. In 1961, at the age of 17, Alcala joined the United States Army to become a paratrooper and served as a clerk. During his service, he was noted by his commanding officer as being manipulative, vindictive, and insubordinate. Alcala was disciplined on several occasions for assaulting young women. In 1964, after what was described as a nervous breakdown, during which he went AWOL and hitchhiked from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to his mother's house in California, Alcala was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and estimated to have an IQ of 135 by a military psychiatrist. He was subsequently discharged from the Army on medical grounds. Other diagnoses later proposed by various psychiatric experts at his trials included narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and malignant narcissism with psychopathy and sexual sadism comorbidities. After being discharged from the Army, Alcala graduated from the UCLA School of the Arts and Architecture. He later studied film under Roman Polanski at New York University. On September 25, 1968, a passing motorist named Donald Haynes called police after witnessing Alcala lure Tali Shapiro, aged 8, into his Hollywood apartment.
I remember the morning was nice and warm because I wore the dress that my nanny had crocheted for me.
And a car pulls up alongside of her, and the man leans out and says, I have a beautiful picture I'd like to show you.
And I guess asked if I needed a ride to school. And I told him I didn't talk to strangers.
And he pulled up alongside of her a little further, kept trolling her.
And that's when he told me he knew my parents. And I really didn't want to get in the car, but I was raised to respect my elders. I got in the car. That's when he asked what time my school started. And then that's when he realized we had plenty of time and he was going to swing by and show me a poster. You know, I didn't know to fear people.
Well, fortunately, a good citizen looks at this and says, I don't like the looks of this. And he actually follows him to his apartment.
The moment I felt danger was when he wanted to go by his place. And I remember wanting to jump out of the car.
So the Good Samaritan, he actually followed the car to a residence where the man took the little girl out of the car and walked her inside, and that didn't look right.
And he calls the police. Says, this is real hinky looking. I don't like it. There's this little girl. I think you ought to check it out.
I don't remember going up to the apartment, and I don't remember anything after that.
I was driving down Sunset heading toward West Hollywood when I received a call to go see a man about a possible kidnapping. I followed him over to the location. At that time, I thought, okay, I better call in for a backup. So I went and called in and requested a backup unit. I went to the front door and started knocking. I could hear someone running around.
So the man came and he opened up the curtains a little bit and peered out and said, "Oh, sorry, I was in the shower. I'll be right there."
I see this male person on the other side, no clothes, not dripping with water, no towel. And I said, "Oh, okay, you need to open the door right now. I need to come in." And he said, wait, let me put my pants on. And I said, "Okay, you got 3 seconds." I probably waited 5 seconds and I kicked the door in. To the right was a dining room, to the left was a living room, and straight ahead was a kitchen. And here was this little girl, blood all over the place, clothes, shoes, and a dress thrown to one side. There was coins on the floor, and she had this steel bar across her neck, which probably weighed 2 pounds.
And there's an image that I will never forget. It's an image of this pipe used to strangle her with, essentially. Press it against her throat, and more blood than should ever be able to come out of a little 8-year-old girl next to these Mary Jane shoes on the floor of this kitchen.
I looked at her, I thought she was dead, she wasn't breathing. The other officers came around, we were looking for the suspect. I went back to check on Telly, and I just couldn't leave her there like that.
The officer had a sort of a life or death decision to make. Chase this man out the back and catch him, or render life-saving aid to the little girl and save her life. And he chose the little girl.
And as I went back in the kitchen, she started gagging, Telly. So then that put everything into high gear. But when I was yelling, the officer that was covering the back door thought I was asking for help. So he ran to the front to help me. We later found out the suspect escaped through the back door.
Telly was bleeding out, literally clinging to life. Fortunately, there was already an ambulance racing to the scene.
To evade the arrest warrant stemming from the Shapiro assault, Alcala left California and enrolled at NYU using the name John Berger. Cornelia Crilly, a 23-year-old Transworld Airlines flight attendant, was found raped and murdered in her Manhattan apartment on June 12, 1971. Alcala had strangled her with her own nylon stockings, leaving her dead in her apartment at 427 East 83rd Street. In 1971, Alcala obtained a job at a New Hampshire arts camp, Camp New Beginnings in the village of George Mills on Lake Sunapee, as a counselor for children using a slightly different alias, John Berger. The FBI added Alcala to its list of 10 most wanted fugitives in early 1971. A few months later, 2 campers at the arts camp noticed his photo on an FBI poster at the post office. That August, Alcala was arrested and extradited to California. By then, Tali Shapiro's parents had relocated their entire family to Mexico and refused to allow Shapiro to testify at the trial. Without their primary witness, prosecutors were unwilling to charge Alcala with rape and attempted murder. He was instead convicted of child molestation, then a lesser charge and sentenced to 3 years. Alcala was paroled in 1974 after 34 months. Less than 2 months after his release, Alcala was rearrested and convicted for assaulting a 13-year-old girl identified in court records as Julie J., who had accepted what she thought would be a ride to school. Alcala was again paroled after serving 2 years and released in 1977 as a registered sex offender. After Alcala's second release in 1977, his Los Angeles parole officer made the unusual choice of permitting a repeat offender and known flight risk to travel to New York City. New York Police Department investigators now believe that a week after returning to Manhattan, Alcala killed Ellen Jane Hover, 23-year-old daughter of nightclub owner Herman Hover, and goddaughter of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. Hover was last seen at her New York apartment on July 15, 1977. Her datebook showed that she had an appointment to meet with one John Berger that same day. Later in 1977, the FBI received a tip about Alcala's 1971 arrest in New Hampshire, related to the Shapiro case in California. Alcala admitted to knowing Hover under questioning, but investigators could not arrest him, since they had not found her body. Her remains were discovered in 1978, buried under heavy rocks on a hillside overlooking the Hudson River, near a location on the John D. Rockefeller estate, where an aspiring model would later report that Berger had taken photos of her. In 1977, Alcala worked briefly at the Los Angeles Times as a typesetter and was interviewed by members of the Hillside Strangler Task Force as part of their investigation of known sex offenders. Although Alcala was ruled out as the strangler, he was arrested and served a brief sentence for marijuana possession. During this period, Alcala convinced hundreds of young men and women that he was a professional fashion photographer and took pictures of them for his portfolio. A Times coworker later recalled that Alcala shared his photos with workmates. "I thought it was weird, but I was young. I didn't know anything," she said. "When I asked why he took the photos, he said their moms asked him to. I remember the girls were naked." Leanne Leadham, who was 17 when Alcala photographed her in 1979, reported that, "He said he was a professional, so in my mind I was being a model for him." Leadham further reported that the portfolio Alcala shared with her also included spread after spread of naked teenage boys. In 1978, in the midst of his killing spree, Alcala was a contestant on the popular game show The Dating Game. Host Jim Lang introduced him as a successful photographer. Between takes, you might find him skydiving or motorcycling. Jed Mills, a fellow Bachelor contestant on the episode, later described Alcala as a very strange guy with bizarre opinions. Alcala won the competition and a date with the episode's bachelorette, Cheryl Bradshaw, who subsequently refused to go out with him because she found him creepy. Well, thank God things turned out okay for her. Unfortunately, this creep isn't done killing yet. On November 9, 1977, Alcala murdered Jill Terry Barcombe, an 18-year-old girl from Oneida, New York, and disposed of her body on a dirt path near Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles. Barcombe was found in a knee-to-chest position and naked from the waist down. There were signs of sexual assault, and she had been strangled with a pair of blue rope ties and beaten. She also had 3 bite marks on her right breast. Initially, authorities believed Barcombe was a victim of the Hillside Strangler. However, after the arrests of Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono, neither of whom confessed to or were convicted of her murder, authorities determined that her case was unrelated. On December 16, 1977, 27-year-old nurse Georgia Marie Wickstead was discovered dead in her Malibu apartment. She was last seen when she drove another nurse, Barbara Gale, home from a bar. When Wickstead did not show up for work the next day, Gale and their co-workers reported her missing. Police arrived at Wickstead's apartment to find signs of forced entry. Wickstead was posed naked on her bedroom floor, strangled with her nylons. She had been sexually assaulted, her skull had been bashed in, and her genitals had been mutilated. Prosecutors later used DNA evidence and a handprint found at the scene to convict Alcala. On June 24, 1978, Charlotte Lee Lamb, a 31-year-old legal secretary from Santa Monica, was found dead in the laundry room of the apartment complex where she was living in El Segundo. She had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and strangled with a shoelace, and was posed with her hands behind her back. DNA at the scene would match that of Alcala and DNA on a pair of earrings found in his storage locker after Robin Christine Samso's 1979 murder would eventually prove to match Lamb's DNA. On February 14, 1979, Alcala picked up 15-year-old hitchhiker Monique Hoyt in Riverside County. He drove Hoyt to his apartment, where he raped her. They then traveled to a secluded mountainous area in Joshua Tree, California, where Alcala took photos of her in her underwear, as well as photos of him raping her once again. He bound and gagged her and began a sustained assault, which included further rape and sodomy. Alcala bludgeoned Hoyt in the head with a rock, but Hoyt escaped when Alcala entered a gas station bathroom on the drive back to Riverside County. Hoyt filed a police report about her ordeal, and Alcala was arrested, but his mother posted his bail. On June 13, 1979, Jill Marie Parenteau, a 21-year-old computer key punch operator, left work early to go to a baseball game. When she did not make it to work the following morning, police went to her Burbank apartment and found signs of forced entry. Parenteau was dead, naked on her bathroom floor. She was posed with pillows under her shoulders. She had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and strangled. Her killer cut himself crawling through a window, and blood evidence would later identify Alcala as the perpetrator. Parenteau's friend, Catherine Bryant, testified that she and Parenteau had met Alcala at a club several times before. On June 20, 1979, Robin Christine Samso, a 12-year-old girl from Huntington Beach, disappeared as she rode a borrowed bicycle from her Huntington Beach home to her ballet class. Her decomposing body was found 12 days later in the Los Angeles foothills, dumped off Santa Anita Canyon Road. She had been beaten, raped, and stabbed with a knife. Samso's friends told police that a stranger had approached them on the beach asking to take their pictures. Detectives circulated a sketch of the photographer, and Alcala's parole officer recognized him. Alcala was arrested in July 1979 and held without bail. He went on trial for Samso's murder, was found guilty in May 1980, and sentenced to death in June. However, the verdict was overturned by the California Supreme Court in 1984 because jurors had been improperly informed of his prior sex crimes. In May 1986, after a second trial virtually identical to the first except for omission of the prior criminal record testimony, he was again convicted and sentenced to death in August. In 1992, the California Supreme Court upheld the verdict, but Alcala filed a federal habeas corpus petition. And in 2001, a United States District Court judge granted it, overturning Alcala's second conviction. That decision was upheld in 2003 by a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals panel, in part because a witness was not allowed to support Alcala's contention that the park ranger who found Samso's body had been hypnotized by police investigators. While preparing for their third prosecution in 2003, Orange County investigators learned that Alcala's DNA, sampled under a new state law over his objections, matched semen left at the rape-murder scenes of 2 women in Los Angeles. Additional evidence, including another cold case DNA match in 2004, led to Alcala's indictment for the murders of 4 additional women. Jill Barcombe, 18, a New York runaway found rolled up like a ball in a Los Angeles ravine in 1977, and originally thought to have been a victim of the Hillside Strangler. Georgia Wickstead, 27, bludgeoned in her Malibu apartment in 1977. Charlotte Lamb, 31, raped, strangled, and left in the laundry room of an El Segundo apartment complex in 1978. And Jill Parenteau, 21, killed in her Burbank apartment in 1979. Another pair of earrings found in Alcala's Seattle storage locker had residue that matched Lamb's DNA. During his incarceration between the second and third trials, Alcala wrote and self-published a book, You, the Jury, in which he claimed innocence in the Samso case and suggested a different suspect. He also filed 2 lawsuits against the California penal system for a slip-and-fall incident and for refusing to provide him a low-fat diet. In 2003, prosecutors entered a motion to join the Samso charges with those of the 4 newly discovered victims. Alcala's attorneys contested it. As one of them explained, if you're a juror and you hear one murder case, you may be able to have reasonable doubt, but it's very hard to say you have reasonable doubt on all 5, especially when 4 of the 5 aren't alleged by eyewitnesses, but are proven by DNA matches. In 2006, the California Supreme Court ruled in the prosecution's favor, and in February 2010, Alcala stood trial on the 5 joined charges. For the third trial, Alcala elected to act as his own attorney. He took the stand in his own defense, and for 5 hours played the roles of both interrogator and witness, asking himself questions and addressing himself as Mr. Alcala in a deeper-than-normal voice, followed by answering them. During this self-questioning and answering session, he told jurors, often in a rambling monotone, that he was at Knott's Berry Farm applying for a job as a photographer at the time Samso was kidnapped. He showed the jury a portion of his 1978 appearance on The Dating Game in an attempt to prove that the earrings found in his Seattle locker were his, not Samso's. Jed Mills, the actor who competed against Alcala on the show, told a reporter that earrings were not yet a socially acceptable accoutrement for men in 1978. That's funny. I'm pretty sure guys were wearing earrings in 1978. Alcala made no significant attempt to dispute the 4 added charges, other than to assert that he could not remember killing any of the women. As part of his closing argument, he played the Arlo Guthrie song Alice's Restaurant, in which the protagonist tells a psychiatrist that he wants to kill. After less than 2 days, the jury convicted him on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. A surprise witness during the penalty phase of the trial was Shapiro. Richard Rappaport, a psychiatrist paid by Alcala and the only defense witness, testified that borderline personality disorder could explain Alcala's claims that he had no memory of committing the murders. The prosecutor argued that Alcala was a sexual predator who knew what he was doing was wrong and didn't care. In March 2010, Alcala was sentenced to death for a 3rd time. After his 2010 conviction, New York authorities announced that they would no longer pursue Alcala because of his status as a convict awaiting execution. Nevertheless, in January 2011, a Manhattan grand jury indicted him for the murders of Crilly and Hover in 1971 and 1977. In June 2012, he was extradited to New York, where he initially entered not guilty pleas on both counts. In December 2012, he changed both pleas to guilty, citing a desire to return to California to pursue appeals of his death penalty conviction. On January 7, 2013, a Manhattan judge sentenced Alcala to an additional 25 years to life. The death penalty has not been an option in New York State since 2007. If you recognize any of these people, please call the police as soon as possible. In March 2010, the Huntington Beach, California, and New York City police departments released 120 of Alcala's photographs and sought the public's help in identifying them in the hope of determining if any of the women and children he photographed were additional victims. Approximately 900 additional photos could not be made public, police said, because they were too sexually explicit. In the first few weeks, police reported that approximately 21 women had come forward to identify themselves, and at least 6 families said they believed they recognized loved ones who disappeared years ago and were never found. None of the photos were unequivocally connected to a missing person case or unsolved murder until 2013. 110 of the original photos remain posted online, and police continue to solicit the public's help with further identifications. Most of the subjects remain unidentified. Police fear that some of the subjects may be additional cold case victims. Now here's the part of the story that gets me angry. I'm not gonna lie. You kind of want the person to fry or whatever. You want the families to get some satisfaction, I guess, from the execution of the monster that took the life of their loved one. But this scumbag, while on death row, died of a heart attack at a hospital in Kings County on July 24, 2021, at age 77. Thanks for watching the video. We really appreciate that. Please subscribe to help the channel grow.